So I got this question from a subscriber who actually reached out, and she said her name is Carrie Ann, and she says, Janie, I'm wondering if you have any content on people who intend to migrate with children. Is this something you can shed light on? Is it better to migrate with them one time, or should I get settled there first and then bring my dependents after? Okay, so if you're on this video, you're like, I want to come to Canada with my kids, with my spouse, my family, and I don't know if I should come with them first. I'm a PR, I just got my study permit, whatever it is, this is where we're going to answer it. So at the end of this video, we're going to talk about who can come, who cannot come, when to file, whether as a PR or a student, and other things you should consider. So if that sounds like something you're interested in hearing more about, settle in, let's go. Hi everybody, welcome. My name is Janie Booz, aka Janie of Canada, and this right here is where we talk about all things studying, working, living, and thriving as a professional newcomer to Canada. If you're new, where have you been? And if you're returning and subscribed, just please give me a like right now. And if you're new, please make sure to subscribe, because I promise there's only fun content over here. Okay, let's get straight into the video because I know you cannot wait. So the first thing you need to know is, as a family, the Canadian government and the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenships Canada body prioritizes, they put a high priority on keeping families together. Okay, so they want you, your spouse, and your kids to be together. And if you're here thinking, okay, I don't know what an express entry is or a study permit is, you should probably check my previous videos because we're probably a step or two ahead. So I'm going to start with if you can bring your spouse and your dependent as a permanent residency. So typically the answer is yes. And if you are going through the express entry route, most likely as you're filling that application, they're going to ask you, are you married? And you would say yes. Do you have dependents? You probably will say yes. So dependents are kids or children under the age of 22. It used to be 19 before, but hooray, Canada has increased that age. So you can, your spouse and your kids can accompany you as you get your PR, and you all can land together. A lot of times that's very straightforward because most people come through that express entry route and they come with your family. The part that people are not so sure about a lot of times is the study aspect. I'm coming as a temporary resident, as a student. But before I go into that, I want you to know that as a permanent resident, there are people who can't come. So we've talked about your spouse and your kids being able to come, but you can't come with your parents, you can't come with uncles or aunties, nephews or nieces, or siblings, right? However, when you come to Canada, there are different programs that you can use to sponsor your parents and your grandparents, for instance, to come later on. But we'll talk about that in a different video. Coming back to as a student, looking for when it'll be a good time to bring your spouse and your kids along. This also applies in cases of temporary workers from countries who can actually get a work permit. So once you get your study permit, you are eligible to get something called an open work permit for your spouse. And then you can also bring along your kids. But you have to note that kids and your spouse would only be eligible up until the duration of your stay. Let me bring that down. Say you get a study permit for 1 year. If you apply for an open work permit and say that expires December 2021, your spouse's open work permit, obviously it's open, so that means that it's not tied to any employer. You don't need to get a job first. They would get that, but they would also have to renew or leave by the same date, which is December 2021, like your permit. Okay, this applies to your kids' study permit as well. Note that children, Canadian education is free for children at the preschool, primary, and secondary level. However, and typically, kids don't need to apply for a study permit if they're in those levels. However, if you are applying for them from outside of Canada, then they do require a study permit. But I've seen places where it says as long as one parent has a valid study or work visa, the kids don't need to apply for a study permit. So please check with your immigration consultant if you're using one, or do the research on yourself to see where you lie and whether you're outside Canada, within Canada, and when you want to do that. Okay, so we both know that the short answer is you can come with your spouse and your kids to Canada. The real question is, when can I come with them? So the truth is, you can file for your kids and your spouse before or after you arrive in Canada. But just note that it will still be the same length as your study permit. I know some people can do it at the same time when they're applying for their study permit. So say when you get your admission, you now want to apply for your study permit as well as your spouse's open work permit. You can do that, but most people will come as visitors first. So their spouses will come as visitors first with that. So what they'll do rather is when you get your study permit, apply for a visitor's visa for your spouse and your kids, and then you can apply for them when they're within Canada. You see, and you can, because that time it's a little easier. It's faster sometimes than applying from outside. So my advice, if this is your first time coming to Canada, you may actually want to come first, settle into your classes, see what's up with your living situation before you bring the rest of your family, right? There's something else that people don't talk a little bit too much about is when you get your study permit and you've settled, and your spouse can also come as a temporary visitor. You can go to the US and on your way back apply for an open work permit for them, and it'll be processed on the spot. It's something called flag polling, as opposed to waiting months for that open work permit to be processed if you apply from outside of Canada, or if you apply during the same time as your study permit. But again, I always say I'm not an immigration consultant, I'm not an immigration lawyer, so always do your own research, okay? So a few things you should consider in deciding when to apply for that open work permit for your spouse as well as study permit for your kids is, first, housing. Do you have an accommodation? You don't want to be pulling a family when you're going to be couch surfing, or if you plan to stay in student residence. You want to make sure that is sorted out. You have some family member you can stay with, or you've come to visit first, gotten some agent that you can work with to find an accommodation for you and your family before you move. So for that reason, you might want to consider coming first before applying for a work permit and bringing the kids along. Again, this also depends on what province are you going to, because with that, you would also consider the second thing is neighborhoods. Is that area, because I know a lot of people is like, I want to come to Canada. You forget that Canada is this huge country with multiculturalness, and one small neighborhood can be very different from another neighborhood, right? What is the demographics of the neighborhood you're going to be staying in? Are you going to feel alone? Is there a community? Because then you can figure out, are there a lot of kids in that neighborhood, or are there typically older people? All of those factors will matter if you're bringing, especially if you're bringing kids. And which brings me to my next point, schooling. What type of schools are available in the city or the area you want to go live in? Maybe you need to come do research first, figure out what schools you can put your kids in before you send for them or bring them along, right? That's another reason why most people do it after they have moved and settled into school. You want to decide, because again, it's probably easier to apply after you've gotten your own permit as opposed to doing all that paperwork beforehand. You also have to understand the Canadian school system, preschool, primary, secondary, what documents are required for your kids to transfer, and what time can they actually start. Because if you're coming to school in September, maybe that's when you have to bring your kids too, because school starts in September. You have to check with the schools to see if they can start midway. All of those considerations are things to keep in mind in deciding whether you want to bring them along or if you want to come first, okay? I promise it's not that overwhelming. Just take it one at a time, okay? Okay. Note that with schooling, public schools are free and private schools you have to pay for. Another big factor to consider in deciding is childcare. We don't talk so much about this, at least I don't, because I'm not in that stage of life, but I worked as a babysitter for a little bit, and if there's one thing I know is that childcare in Canada is really expensive, especially in Ontario, Toronto to be specific. I live there, so I know. Typically, daycares are regulated, and those are the expensive ones. You can also have babysitters if you want to be the primary caretaker of your kids and be home, especially now in COVID situations. You can take your courses online, so you can take care of your kid depending on what age they are. And so babysitters you might get once in a while. Daycare in some places is regulated, so that means that you pay according to how much you earn, which is great. However, it's still quite expensive. I think it gets to, in some places, about $20 per day per child. So in a month you could be paying just as much as your rent for childcare. So it's something to consider, and make sure you have enough financial backing before you bring the kids along. Another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking of moving a family is healthcare. If you're coming as a temporary worker, you have to arrange your own insurance, because you're not a permanent resident where you can get, at least in Ontario, it's called OHIP, Ontario Health Insurance Plan. Every province has their own insurance plans. Some schools will have insurance plans for international students. Some you'll have to find for yourself and your family. Things like going to the dentist, all of that you have to keep in mind and make sure you kind of have scoped the area before you bring them along. Another thing too, honestly, especially for first timers, it's honestly, anybody, if you've not lived in Canada, you're still going to need to psychologically prep yourself as well, because there's something called culture shock. Understanding the difference in cold. It depends on when you come again. You might come during daylight savings and you might be losing time, and it's just different. Some people want to be able to process that a little bit before they bring family on, especially if you're very hands-on with your family or you have young kids. So that might be something to put in mind, like being prepped for the culture shock. I also know families who have come through the express entry route and had no choice but to come with everybody, right? And they all figured it out together. So it's definitely relative. We've covered topics of if you can come with your family, your husband, your partner, your wife, or your kids. Who cannot come. We've talked about options to consider, things to consider when trying to move with your family. I've shared my advice with you on how you can process that, as well as things to note. So with all of this shared, let me know what your thoughts are. Where are you express entry? Are you coming as a student? Or are you thinking of coming first and then bringing them along? Or are you thinking of coming together? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Remember though that if you decide to wait and come first before bringing the kids and the family, their application, or rather their document, will still expire at the same time as yours. However, if you plan to extend your study permit or get a work permit after that, they will still be with you. If you apply at the same time as when you were applying for your study permit, you all will be able to come together. But in some cases, it's a lot of burden up front, having to get all the documentation you need for your partner and your kids, especially when you're not sure if you're going to get the study permit. So you have to weigh the pros and cons of what you decide. Let me know what you're thinking though, and if you have any other questions. If this video has been helpful, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel for more helpful content on living as a newcomer to Canada, and make sure to check my website if you need one-on-one coaching or if you need to review your resume on your LinkedIn at janiebooz.com. And I'll see you on the next video. Take it easy.